So week 2, nutrition for weight loss and fertility, and the focus of tonight is going to be the importance of blood sugar for weight balance and long-term weight maintenance and for your fertility and reproductive health. And this is, in my opinion, one of the most important topics to focus on to support weight balance and also have a positive impact on reproductive health. And this is very relevant for both men and women trying to conceive. So I wanted to take a real deep dive tonight into why blood sugar balance is important for weight loss and for your reproductive health, how we can achieve good blood sugar balance through dietary and lifestyle measures, and how also we can use certain nutrients potentially to improve insulin sensitivity. So that's going to be the real focus of tonight. As always, these slides are going to come through in text form after today. So what am I talking about when I talk about blood sugar balance? I'm talking about the levels of glucose in your bloodstream throughout the day, and the terminology blood sugar and blood glucose can be used interchangeably, and I do tend to use them interchangeably throughout these slides. So carbohydrate-based foods, or the carb element of different foods, are broken down into glucose in the gut, and that is then released into the bloodstream as blood glucose or sugar. So we eat carbs, that gets broken down in the gut into glucose, and then that goes through the gut wall into the bloodstream, and your blood sugar levels will rise after a meal. Blood sugar levels will fluctuate throughout the day, and the degree of this fluctuation is determined by the type of food that we eat. So for example, a very high carb, fast release meal will give us this red kind of curve to the right, which has a lot of up and down. You can see that roller coaster of blood glucose, whereas a balanced meal is going to give us this green curve, a lovely, slow, gradual release. After a meal, blood glucose levels increase, and then they will gradually drop again. When blood sugar levels are low, we're going to feel hungry. So low blood sugar sends a signal to the brain that you need more food. So why is blood sugar balance important for weight loss? And there's two main reasons. Firstly is that blood sugar balance helps us to balance energy levels throughout the day, and importantly, our appetite. Blood sugar levels that spike and then drop rapidly will lead to snacking and sugar cravings, because you're going to find you're going to get those episodes of low blood sugar more frequently. Eating to keep blood sugar stable can help us balance our appetite and beat sugar cravings. And as I mentioned, the main thing you want to focus on when you're undertaking a weight loss approach, some dietary changes, are that they are sustainable, and that's what blood sugar balance does. Another side of blood sugar and the relationship with weight loss or weight balance is how the blood sugar levels in your bloodstream will dictate the amount of insulin that your body has to produce to deal with that blood sugar. Insulin's the hormone is really key here. It's a hormone that helps to move blood sugar into our cells for energy. So when we eat carb-based foods, it gets broken down into blood sugar, released into the bloodstream, and then our body picks up on this, and the pancreas releases insulin into the bloodstream to move that glucose into the cells for energy. But if you're eating in a way that causes our body to produce a lot of blood sugar, you're going to produce a lot more insulin. And whereas a little bit of insulin is good, too much is bad, mainly because insulin is a fat storage hormone that blocks weight loss. So if you've always got high insulin because you're eating in a way that keeps your blood sugar high, you're going to be in fat storage mode, and you're not going to be in weight loss mode. So if we always have elevated insulin levels, it can be very difficult to lose weight. A combination of high blood glucose and insulin can lead to fat storage, and this happens specifically around the middle because this conversion process from blood glucose into fat happens in the liver. And this is a really great diagram that just shows you sort of how blood sugar imbalances can affect you in terms of energy levels, how they can affect your weight balance, how they can potentially even affect your mood, how anxious or stressed out you might feel. So generally, if you're going to have spikes of blood sugar and you're getting your blood sugar is spiking up into this red area, you're going to be producing too much insulin, you're in fat storage mode, inflammatory, you're in weight gain mode, and it's also potentially damaging to the cardiovascular system. If you're dropping too low as well, you're going to have feelings of anxiety, you're going to be hungry, you're going to crave sugar and caffeine, so you're not going to be making good food choices either. So ideally what we would want to do is get your blood sugar in this normal range and keep it in there. You're going to have stable mood, stable appetite, stable energy, and reduced anxiety and reduced cravings. So this is really key to achieve. So why is blood sugar balance important for fertility? It's not just important for weight loss, and the key focus of these 4 weeks is to look at ways that you can support weight loss at the same time as enhancing your reproductive health. So many weight loss approaches maybe are not suitable for that, as we discussed last week about how low calorie approach is maybe not good for your reproductive health. So when you eat in a way that keeps your blood sugar stable, it's also going to support your fertility. Elevated insulin levels are central to the development of PCOS. Insulin promotes the conversion of estrogen to testosterone, and this interferes with ovulation and promotes other PCOS symptoms such as acne and hirsutism. So if you have PCOS, blood sugar balance is really key to getting on top of that. About 80% of women with PCOS have insulin-resistant PCOS. The other 20%, it tends to be adrenal gland related to stress. So for majority of women, but blood sugar balance and getting your insulin levels under control, really, really key. Even if you don't have PCOS, elevated insulin can have a negative impact on female fertility. For example, elevated blood sugar levels and insulin levels are associated with reduced egg quality and also can negatively impact ovulation, because elevated blood sugar can actually cause hormonal imbalances even in women who do not have PCOS. So balancing blood sugar and reducing insulin is a real goal for a nutritional approach to support your fertility. And it's also important for men who are trying to conceive. And this is because for two reasons: elevated insulin levels correlate with poor sperm quality. So in the same way, high blood sugar, high insulin is related to poor egg quality in women. It's also associated with poor sperm quality in men. High insulin in men can actually lead to reduced testosterone levels. And healthy testosterone is obviously central to male fertility and sperm quality. So in women, high insulin can cause high testosterone. In men, it can cause low testosterone. So that's a really important thing to understand. So blood sugar, insulin, and PCOS. With PCOS, the women are often found to suffer from a condition called insulin resistance. And it's also important to understand insulin resistance is the state where our cells don't respond effectively to insulin. And as a result, we have to produce larger than normal amounts of insulin after a meal to deal with the glucose produced after that meal. So I mentioned a few slides ago how after you eat a meal that contains carbs, it's broken down into glucose, goes into the bloodstream, and then your body releases insulin from the pancreas. And that insulin gets the glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells to be burned for energy. So imagine that those cells don't respond to the signal of insulin to get the glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells. So what you're left with after a meal, if you have insulin resistance, is that the glucose stays in the bloodstream because the insulin isn't able to get the glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells. So glucose levels remain high, and the pancreas keeps producing more and more and more insulin until eventually it will get that glucose out of the bloodstream. But in the meantime, you've been in a very high glucose state and a high insulin state. And this obviously then can contribute to weight gain, weight around the middle, and also the hormonal imbalances that you would associate with PCOS. So if you're someone with PCOS and insulin resistance, you're going to produce more insulin after a carb-containing meal compared to someone without PCOS who doesn't have insulin resistance. And that's going to be a big driver of your hormonal imbalance. And these, for example, are some symptoms of insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is very, very common. I would do testing with clients. I would generally look at your HbA1c levels. And majority of clients I find are not in optimal metabolic health in terms of their insulin resistance. So you shouldn't really have levels above 32. 32 or below is what is considered optimal to have good insulin sensitivity. And again, most people don't have that, and what I'm finding. And these are sort of symptoms of insulin resistance: skin tags, acne, storing fat around the middle. You might have high triglycerides or high cholesterol. You might feel tired after meals because if you imagine the glucose from the meal is not getting into the cells to be burned for energy, it just stays in your bloodstream. You can crave sweets, you can have poor sleep patterns. So all these are signs of insulin resistance. So how do we eat to achieve blood sugar balance? How do we achieve that? So we want to focus on a few things. We want to choose slow release carbohydrates and avoid meals that are dominated by carbs. We don't want to be eating meals that are just a big bowl of pasta. We don't want to be starting the day with 2 slices of toast and a bowl of breakfast cereal. We want to make sure we're having protein every time we eat with every meal and snack. We want to cut out sugar and sweets as much as possible because these are obviously going to have a very, very significant impact on our blood sugar levels. And we want to avoid processed foods that can also destabilize blood sugar levels. And we looked at that a wee bit last week. So the relationship between carbs and blood glucose, we've talked about this a few slides ago, but just to recap, the blood sugar released from a meal will come mainly from the carbohydrate element. All carbohydrates will eventually become glucose, no matter what sort of how healthy they are, how high fiber they are, all carbohydrates will eventually get broken down into glucose. Carbohydrate is broken down into glucose in our gut and released into the bloodstream, and then that raises our blood glucose levels. And the amount and type of carbohydrate in a meal will dictate how high our blood glucose levels rise after that meal. If our blood glucose levels don't rise too high, we produce less insulin. So that's what we want to achieve. We want to achieve a lower blood glucose level after a meal so that we can control our insulin levels. So should you eat carbs? So you've just heard me say that all carbs will eventually become glucose. So you're thinking maybe should you go on a very low carbohydrate diet to support weight loss? Carbohydrates cause blood sugar levels to increase. And that's why very low carb diets have become popular for weight loss and fertility. You know, we're talking about keto, paleo diet, even for example, now the carnivore diet has become very popular. And a lot of these diets will eliminate carbohydrate-based foods. Instead, meals are based around protein and vegetables. And for example, keto would be quite a high-fat diet. These diets can be very effective in the short term at supporting weight loss and improvement in insulin resistance. However, these diets are very difficult to maintain long-term and expensive. And as I mentioned, you want to be following a weight loss approach that you can really maintain long-term. But paleo diets can be lower in fiber and have not been implemented or studied in the long term. So we also don't know the long-term impact of being on these diets. So I recommend that you eat slow carb, not low carb. And that's the key to eating for blood sugar balance, is to eat slow release carbs because they will release their energy in a gradual and sustained way. And I did mention last week that women for ovulation do need some carbs in their diet. High GI, or that's called high glycemic index, that stands for, refined foods cause blood glucose levels to spike, resulting in excessive insulin release. We want to avoid those foods that are going to cause those fast release carbs that cause your blood sugar to spike. Carbs that release energy more slowly are called low GI carbs, low glycemic index. This means they do not spike blood glucose levels, and if blood glucose levels do not spike, then we don't have to produce too much insulin to deal with them. So this is a good example of your slow release carbs. You've got potato with the skin, beans, and vegetables there, and fast release white rice, white bread, and sugar. So what are the slow release carbs that you can incorporate into your diet? So potatoes with the skin, such as wedges, baked or baby boiled, and also, as we mentioned last week, having them cold, so cold waxy potatoes. Oats, especially steel cut oats, are very good, or obviously jumbo. The less processed, the better. Because if you imagine fine milled have been broken down, so they're going to be a faster release. German style rye bread is also very good slow release. Sourdough bread, and it has to be the proper sourdough made by a sourdough bakery, not sort of some of the more unoriginal sourdough bread you can get nowadays. Bread, which is then toasted from the freezer. So freezing bread, defrosting it, and then toasting it has been shown to reduce the release of carbs from that bread. Whole grain wheat, such as bulgur wheat, would be very good. Barley, quinoa, and brown rice or brown rice noodles, all really good choices for your slow release carbs. And how do you slow down a carb? So not only can you choose the carbohydrate element of your diet to come from slow release carbs, you can also combine them in meals in a way that will also slow down the release of glucose from these carbs as well. So the choice of the carbs is important, but also how you combine them with other elements of the meal will also slow down the release. For example, having fiber, so choosing whole grain carbs or an additional high fiber food together with the carbs such as vegetables. That will release less glucose and that will be released more slowly because the fiber present slows down digestion and results in a more steady energy release. So for example, eat potatoes with the skin or choose brown rice for the higher fiber content. Eat protein together with your carbs. So some people say put some clothes on your carbs. Protein together with carbs will significantly slow down the release of the glucose from those carbs. So protein takes a long time to digest, and the protein combined, mixed together with your carbs in your stomach, will slow down the release of the blood sugar after that meal. Protein makes us feel fuller for longer. We looked at that quite a bit last week. Eat fruit in its natural form with all the fiber intact. Avoid fruit juice and dried fruit. So if you imagine once we process fruit, like extract the juice, or we dry fruit, we're either concentrating the fruit sugars or we're releasing the fruit sugars. So they become a fast release carb, whereas a full piece of fruit, especially eaten with the skin, is going to be a slow release carb. Eat some good fats together with your carb. Fat also slows down digestion. So incorporating good fats such as olive oil, nuts or seeds or avocado in a meal will also reduce the blood sugar impact from that meal and slow down the blood sugar impact. Eating your carbs cold will help form the resistant starch that we looked at that a little bit last week. And then proper sourdough bread, the acids that are present in sourdough bread, if you ever get that really sour taste when you're eating it, they actually slow down the blood sugar impact from the bread as well. So, and freezing it and then defrosting it, you're going to so significantly reduce the release of carbs from the sourdough bread as well. And we talked quite a bit about resistant starch last week, but just to recap, it also has a lot of benefits for blood sugar balance. We were talking about it being a high satiety food because it gets digested and broken down slowly. It also really helps to balance your blood sugar. So resistant starch plays a central role in promoting a slow release of glucose from a meal. The resistant starch present in certain carbs resists digestion in the gut. Therefore, the glucose from these carbs is released more slowly. So that the carbs that are inside these resistant starch-rich foods are actually, they're not really accessible as easily via digestion, so it doesn't get released into the bloodstream as much. There's also a second meal effect. So the energy from the meal that you have after a resistant starch-rich meal will also have a lower blood glucose impact. So for example, if you start the day with a resistant starch-rich breakfast, your lunch will also have a reduced blood glucose impact. So really showing you the benefits of this resistant starch for weight balance, blood sugar balance here. And adding beans to your meal. So this is a really good example of how incorporating resistant starch into a meal impacts the blood sugar levels following that meal. And if anyone follows the Glucose Goddess or has ever used her app to track their blood sugar levels, you'll recognize her diagrams here. So beans are high in resistant starch and protein. So two really good factors that will then slow down the release of glucose. Therefore, when combined with white rice, they slow down the breakdown of the glucose, resulting in a lower blood glucose spike. So just have a quick look at this diagram to the left. If you eat a bowl of white rice on its own, this is showing you the blood sugar impact, and you'll see it's quite a steep rise, and the black shaded area actually signifies the blood sugar produced. So you'll see that's actually caused quite a lot of blood sugar release. And actually, do you see the dip afterwards? Because you've gone up, you've spiked quite a bit, you're actually then going lower, almost a bit hypoglycemic below then as well. However, if you combine the rice with these black beans, so maybe like a Mexican dish or something like that, or a vegetarian chili con carne, for example, or chili non-carne, I should say, then do you see here, this really significantly reduces the blood sugar impact, and the blood glucose produced afterwards is really much, much lower. And you'll see we don't get that real spike, and we also don't get the drop afterwards. So both those factors are really important. And resistant starch has also been shown to help prevent insulin resistance and improve your insulin sensitivity. So not only is there a beneficial impact of resistant starch on your blood sugar, so it's actually slowing down the release of blood sugar, the resistant starch in these foods travels through your gut. It'll actually end up, because it doesn't get broken down very easily, it actually ends up in your colon, where some of it gets produced into gas, unfortunately. But the rest of it actually is fermented by the good bacteria in your colon and gets converted into something called short-chain fatty acids. And these are really important substances that are produced in the colon, then they're absorbed through the colon wall into the bloodstream, and they get into your body, and they have a really important benefit on your glucose metabolism, and they can actually then improve your insulin sensitivity or reduce your insulin resistance. So this is like this long-term effect. If you're having resistant starch in your diet every day, you're producing more of these short-chain fatty acids in the middle, and that is actually going to have a positive impact on your insulin sensitivity. So you have an immediate impact from eating foods rich in resistant starch, and you'll have this long-term build-up effect on it improving your insulin sensitivity. So really, really beneficial, these foods. And I like to always explain that it's about quality and quantity when you're talking about your carbs. So I've talked about the choice of where your carbs come from, but it's also really important to understand how much of your meal should come from carbs. And it is very easy to fall into the habit of having carb dominated meals because they're quick, because they're easy, and because they're cheap. Sometimes that can be a factor as well. High fiber, nutritious carbohydrates will result in smaller blood glucose response, but the quantity of the meal that comes from carbs is also important. So try and avoid carb-based meals such as toast, pasta, pizza, or risotto. And at meals, a quarter of your plate should be covered with carbs and another quarter with protein. you should fill up half your plate with veg. So I don't know if any of you sort of are from families where they would have been filled up, half of the plate would have been potatoes and the other the corner would have been veg, and then you would have had your meat. So I know my granny, when she used to feed you, about 5 potatoes on your plate and a little lovely tiny little portion of veg. So you want to swap those ratios around. You want to fill up half your plate with lots of non-starchy veg, so not root vegetables, more green leafy veg, etc. A quarter of your plate should be carbs and a quarter should be protein. And applying those ratios at, say, lunch and dinner is a really good way to achieve a really stable, steady blood glucose response after the meal. Because if you imagine you've got lots of fiber from the veg, not very much carbohydrates, you've got all your protein from your protein on the corner, and then you've got just a moderate portion of carbs. So your blood sugar response to that meal is going to be very steady. So it's just another example of showing you how portion size is important, no matter what type of carb you're choosing. So here's a small portion and it shows you how much blood glucose will be produced, and you go all the way up to a large portion and you're going to end up with a blood glucose spike. So, and even if this was brown rice, if you ate a huge portion, you're eventually going to get a blood glucose spike. So this is what a balanced plate looks like. You know, if you can see here, you filled up half the plate with lots of lovely colourful veg. You've got one good serving of your protein and you've got a quarter of the plate covered with carbs. So looking at that kind of a ratio is a really good place to start. And try and eat some protein at every meal, but especially breakfast. And we talked about this last week, how that really can balance your blood sugar and control your satiety levels for the rest of the day. This rule is one really key change to make when trying to achieve blood sugar balance, and eat meals and snacks without any protein is one of the key mistakes that I see a lot of people making. And I always talk to people, we talk about breakfast quite a lot, because I think it's one of the biggest changes you can make, that you'll actually see this downstream effect on the rest of the day, on your energy levels, your blood glucose levels, how much you're snacking. And a lot of people tend to have high protein meals at the weekend. And during the week, we'll be grabbing cereal or toast, for example, or maybe even like a croissant or a muffin. And it's the weekend. I always say to people, you know, when you've had a cooked breakfast, you take a bit more time, you have maybe a brunch style meal. I'll say, well, when do you feel hungry after that? And they'll often go, well, actually, I usually don't feel hungry all the way until dinner time. And I said, well, that's whereas during the week, when they're grabbing the carb-based breakfast, often they're having snacks again mid-morning, or they're really, really starving by the time they get to lunch. So that's the effect of a high protein breakfast. It really can reduce your appetite levels and keep your blood sugar stable for the rest of the day. It's going to make sure your blood sugar is released more gradually. And if you imagine, the way you start the day is also very impactful, because if you start the day on a bad roller coaster, it's going to be very much difficult to get that under control a few hours later. If you start the day with a big faster release, if you have a bit of dark chocolate, say at 3 p.m, it's much less likely to destabilize everything. So always have protein at breakfast. That would probably be my number one rule. I'm trying to get 30 grams of protein. So, you know, trying to aim for the 30 grams. If you find that too tough, do 20 to 30 grams. I said, try it for a week and see how you feel. I don't know if anyone's been trying it this last week. So this is just an example about what 30 grams of protein might look like at breakfast. And this is an idea for alternatives, moving away from carb-dominated meals and carb-dominated snacks to more balanced blood sugar balanced meals. So instead of fast release breakfast cereals, and breakfast cereals are very, very bad for your blood sugar. I can't really think of a worse way to start the morning, to be honest. But swap that for porridge with protein powder, seeds and fruit. Instead of white toast and jam, do rye toast with peanut butter and berries. Instead of chocolate bar, have dark chocolate, a square of dark chocolate with a handful of nuts. Instead of a biscuit, have oat cakes with hummus and cucumber slices. Instead of just a banana on its own at snack time, have apple with some almonds. So that would be my really lovely go-to snack. When you have a piece of fruit, sort of say for a snack in the middle of the day, always combine it with a small handful of nuts, because the protein and the fat and the fiber in the nuts is also going to slow down the carbs from the fruit as well. Instead of going for a white bread sandwich, have maybe a whole grain pita or wrap and have plenty of protein in there. Instead of having pasta with tomato sauce, have whole grain pasta and use a pesto sauce, maybe made with nuts, and adding in a bit of extra protein there. And risotto would be one I would kind of stay away from generally. Try and have maybe something instead like that with a bit more protein, like chicken curry and a serving of brown rice. Or if you love risotto, make sure you're adding in a good bit of protein to your risotto and having it with a good serving of veg on the side, or a salad or something like that. So the Mediterranean diet is actually one of the most beneficial dietary approaches known to support weight loss and for fertility. What's interesting is carbohydrates are not forbidden in the Mediterranean diet because the fiber they provide has also been shown to improve insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity. And the Mediterranean diet's benefits are not new. They've been experienced over hundreds of years, unlike the keto and paleo diets. So we do know that the Mediterranean diet has really positive impact on your blood sugar balance and your insulin sensitivity. So how do you follow the principles of eating a Mediterranean style diet if you don't live in a Mediterranean climate? I always say base your meals around fruits and vegetables. Try and get 6 servings of vegetables a day and about 2 servings of fruit, 2 to 3 servings of fruit every day. I did actually work with a client last week, and I found out she was eating 8 servings of fruit every day. So as much as fruit is really nutritious and full of vitamins and antioxidants and lovely antioxidants, which are very good for fertility and reproductive health, if you're verging going beyond three servings a day, you're going to add up to a lot of sugar from the fruit, and that could potentially be impacting your blood sugar if you are going into that excessive amount of around 8 servings of fruit a day. Or that I would also apply that with like fruit juice as well, if you're drinking a lot of fruit juice. So try and just make sure that you're not going too far with the fruit, because that can impact your blood sugar. Eat a serving of beans or lentils every day. That would be my kind of number one recommendation. Beans, as we looked at last week, they're high satiety. They're this great package of carbs, fiber, and protein, and resistant starch. So they have this really lovely beneficial effect. They release energy very slowly and are filling. I tend to recommend clients have a bean-based meal, bean or lentil-based meal at lunchtime, because I find that's a really lovely way to get a high protein lunch. And most people find that really keeps them going all the way through until dinner time. So they're not snacking as soon as they get through the door when they get home. Use extra virgin olive oil to dress vegetables and salads every day. 15 milliliters daily has been shown to reduce insulin levels. Eat a handful of nuts every day. Both almonds and walnuts have been shown to reduce insulin resistance, that HbA1c level. Try to avoid snacking. So when we're not eating, we're not producing insulin. So if you're constantly nibbling and snacking, you're always going to be producing insulin. So you're never really going to be in fat loss mode. You're always going to be in fat storage mode. Have some good quality protein with every meal. Even red meat, and I do see this a lot. I'm a big fan of quality red meat at least once a week in your diet, or twice a week if you don't object to it, or you're not vegetarian. It's such a highly nutritious, really good source of protein, really good source of zinc, B12, lots of nutrients I see people that are a bit low in. I think we've been mistakenly turned away from red meat. We think it's pro-inflammatory. High quality grass-fed or red meat or game is really, really nutritious. Alcohol should only be with meals and in moderation. I would say if you're trying to conceive, alcohol not at all. And if you're really serious about weight loss, alcohol not at all. And sugar and sweets should be a treat 1 to 2 times a week and replaced with fresh fruit for if you have a sugar craving, or square of dark chocolate that we talked about last week. So this is just a few examples of Mediterranean days diet and sort of a few ideas. You'll see these meals are all high protein, always contain some fruits or vegetables, and always are quite high fiber as well. And what are common blood sugar mistakes that I see that are going to cause blood sugar levels to spike and drop? So eating a sugary sweet breakfast based on fast release carbs. Starting the day that way is going to have your blood sugar spiking all over the place. And, you know, even some of the healthy bars like Nature Valley bars, Fiber One bars, they might be low calorie, but they're going to be fast release because they're processed. And they're probably quite high sugar as well. So they're going to spike your blood sugar, and then you're going to, so if you spike your blood sugar sort of first thing after breakfast, then you're going to crash. And that's going to be mid-morning, and you're going to reach for a cup of tea and a biscuit or a cup of coffee or a vanilla latte or something. And if you imagine, once you're on this roller coaster, it is almost impossible to get off it. So really thinking about what your breakfast is. If you really love your croissant and cappuccino as a bit of a treat, have it, say, for example, at the weekend, but before that, try and have a protein-based breakfast initially, and then have that as a, like a mid-morning treat. Filling up on low-calorie but fast-release carb-based foods. This is also going to spike your blood sugar, so things like rice cakes, Snack Jacks. These low-calorie snacks, they're low-calorie, but they're fast-release, and they will spike your blood sugar. So it's important to distinguish between what foods are low-calorie and what might actually be a fast release carb, even though it's low calorie, so it might be spiking your blood sugar. a lot of people don't eat any protein until lunch or even dinner time most days. So I see a lot of people that don't have any protein at breakfast and sometimes even don't have any protein at lunch. And that is going to mean your blood sugar, by the time you get home for dinner, your blood sugar is going to be all over the place, and you'll find yourself ravenous at dinner and maybe even after dinner, still eating a lot, still snacking even after dinner. And I see a lot of people who snack on fast release sugary snacks, combining that with coffee in between meals. So if your blood sugar is low and then you eat something sugary together with coffee, you'll have a double whammy of sugar and caffeine on your blood sugar. Your blood sugars are going to skyrocket and then crash again. And if you do this specifically when you're very, very hungry and your blood sugar is already low, it's going to be even worse. So I always say to people, if you do love going for a coffee and a sweet treat, have it after a meal, because you're going to have a proper meal. It's going to have a reduced impact on your blood sugar. And as I said, eating carb-dominated meals, so that could be meals that are really just carb-based, pizza, risotto, or for example, pasta with tomato sauce and no protein in the sauce, or no protein in the pasta dish. Do you struggle with sugar cravings after a meal? It could be your dessert stomach. So this is a really interesting one. Do you struggle with sugar cravings just after your lunch or dinner? You're probably not hungry. It's your dessert stomach. So the dessert stomach is actually, this is really interesting research, the dessert stomach is an evolutionary craving that enables us to keep eating when we're full. It was handy for us during times of feast and famine so that we could keep eating when we were full, because when food was available, we had to just eat and eat and eat. So remember, those sugar cravings aren't hunger. And this is a really good way to understand that if you just ignore them, they will pass. You're not actually hungry. So if you imagine the scenario where you're in a restaurant, you've eaten as maybe a starter, a main course, and maybe you've left something on your plate, you're absolutely stuffed. The waitress takes away the plates and she said, "Oh, would you like the dessert menu?" And even if she'd said, "Oh, would you like another serving of steak? Would you like another piece of fish?" You'd be like, "No way, I can't fit it in, but I can fit in that piece of dessert." And that's this whole if you change the type of food, you can actually start to eat more. In a similar way, you can fit in maybe a cheese board if you're not a dessert person. It's a different type of food, and we can actually fit that in even though we're still full. And on top of looking at the balance of our plate and the types of carbs, there's specific foods that have been shown to help support blood sugar balance. For example, the spices, cinnamon, ginger, and turmeric. Another seasoning called sumac that I really love. It's absolutely delicious, like sprinkled over salads or hummus. It's got a lovely lemony flavor. It's really good for blood sugar balance. Extra virgin olive oil, as we said, at least a tablespoon daily, been shown to improve your insulin sensitivity. Walnuts and almonds, green tea, and apple cider vinegar. I don't know if anyone's aware of a lot of the research on apple cider vinegar. If you are struggling with your blood sugar, either incorporating apple cider vinegar in a salad dressing daily with maybe your main meal, or actually even drinking a little bit of apple cider vinegar in water, about a tablespoon before a meal, has been shown to significantly reduce the blood sugar impact from that meal. However, you would want to take care that you're drinking it through a straw, or you've diluted it enough that it is not going to damage the enamel of your teeth, because it is very acidic. So blood sugar balance and insulin sensitivity. So as noted before, as soon as you adapt your diet to balance blood sugar, you'll see an improvement in blood sugar levels almost immediately. If you get up tomorrow and start to follow these principles of blood sugar balance, you'll actually start to feel better straight away, because your blood sugar will start to balance almost immediately. However, the other side of blood sugar balance is insulin sensitivity. And we looked at how women with PCOS have reduced insulin sensitivity to the action of insulin, and for that reason, they have high blood glucose and high insulin levels after a meal. Therefore, together with adapting our diet to reduce blood sugar levels after meals, we also want to support the body nutritionally to improve the insulin sensitivity of the cells. And this can help speed up weight loss quicker than just diet alone. So what nutrients and what factors actually help to improve the insulin sensitivity of our cells? And so these are factors that can actually also help to reverse the insulin resistance of the body. So for example, exercise, specifically resistance training. Cinnamon, some people actually take cinnamon in very high levels as a supplement, even in capsules. Vitamin D levels, so I always recommend checking and optimizing your vitamin D. It can have a really positive impact on your insulin sensitivity. Omega-3 fats, the good fats from oily fish, have been showing to enhance the insulin sensitivity of the cells. Magnesium, and some people suspect, and there is a school of thought, that insulin resistance and the epidemic of insulin resistance that we have in society is actually linked to magnesium deficiency. Chromium, a really important mineral for insulin sensitivity. Myo-inositol, which is a real favorite of mine for women who are trying to conceive and also trying to improve their blood sugar levels. It's been shown to also promote a healthy ovulation and sleep, for example. So that's a lovely one that I use a lot with women who are trying to conceive and also trying to lose weight and get their blood sugars under control. The good bacteria in our gut, having a healthy population of gut bacteria is important to improve our insulin sensitivity. These good bacteria can actually help to control the blood sugar response from a meal. Getting enough sleep is really important. If you have just a few days with not enough sleep, your body will become insulin resistant almost immediately. Have you ever had like a few sleepless nights, or had that night where maybe you'd had to get up at like 2 a.m. to go to the airport for a flight, and the next day you just can't stop eating and you can't stop eating sugar? The reason is that your body has become less insulin sensitive almost immediately through a lack of sleep. And also you would want to address the stress hormone cortisol. It actually can make the body more insulin resistant as well. And we're going to look a lot more at lifestyle factors and cortisol and hormonal imbalances next week. So we're going to build on this even further next week. And exercise is really key, but 2 key forms of exercise have been shown to be beneficial for blood sugar balance and insulin sensitivity. So walking and moving immediately after a meal helps to bring down blood glucose levels straight away. As glucose, when we move our muscles, glucose is drawn into the muscles to be burned for energy. And this transport of the glucose into the muscles to be burned for energy does not need insulin. So your glucose levels will drop because of the movement, and your insulin levels will not spike either. So trying to walk or move immediately after a meal a few times a day, maybe for around 10 minutes, is really, really beneficial. And resistance training. It is a much more effective way to use your time if you've got limited time to exercise than cardio at improving your insulin sensitivity. So if you really want to sort of focus in on what you're going to do and what exercise you're going to spend your time on, try and choose resistance training. Resistance training, your insulin sensitivity will improve straight away. The body becomes more insulin sensitive immediately after a resistance training session, but also in the long run, it has benefits because you'll develop muscle that makes the body more insulin sensitive. And you should aim for 30 minutes of resistance training 5 times a week to support your insulin sensitivity. And how can you check your insulin sensitivity? So importantly, the HbA1c, that is a measure of how high your blood sugars have been over the past 3 months. So it should be around 32 to be optimal. 36 and above is indicative of insulin resistance and indicates your risk of going on to develop type 2 diabetes. So looking at what your HbA1c is and trying to optimize it is really important. ALT is a marker of liver enzymes. 18 or above in women or 25 and above in men could indicate that you have poor insulin sensitivity, and it could be impacting your liver because you could be dealing with fatty deposits in the liver. And that would be done on a really standard blood test for most in most GP surgeries. Vitamin D, you want to aim for a level of around 100 nanomoles per litre, which is above what is considered sufficient in most tests. So remember, sufficiency isn't enough. We want to be optimizing our vitamin D to support our insulin sensitivity. So these are really important measures. If you can check those, it will give you a lot of insight into how your body is responding to blood glucose and if you are insulin resistant at all. And just a last little note, how we think about blood glucose is changing. We're now starting to understand that simply not simply the food we eat that dictates our blood glucose and insulin levels. Our gut bacteria play a very important role in determining how high our blood glucose levels rise after a meal. And it's interesting, women with PCOS were found to have different gut bacteria from women without PCOS. And now whenever I do work one-on-one with someone with PCOS, I will generally look at their gut microbiome as a factor in trying to support and bring down blood glucose levels. The nature of our gut bacteria was a better way to predict blood glucose levels after a meal than the carb content of that meal. So probiotics are key, or having a healthy gut microbiome. So if you have a history of antibiotic use, if you have IBS, if you've had your gallbladder removed, anything that sort of, if you get frequent UTIs, all signs that you might have a low level of good bacteria in their gut could be a sign that you need to maybe focus on your gut microbiome to really support weight balance and blood glucose balance. And then that's just another little slide about your resistant starch, how that feeds your gut changes the gut microbiome, so it actually supports the gut microbiome as well, reduces the blood sugar response from that meal, and also by producing short-chain fatty acids goes into the bloodstream and reboots your metabolism. So we talked about resistant starch being the nature's Ozempic last week, and it really, really is. And just we're building on what we've been talking about. Last week we talked about high satiety. Today we're talking about blood sugar balance, and we're always focusing on reproductive health. So if you're looking at these 3 dietary approaches, what would you find here in the middle? What are the factors that link all these diets? What are the fundamentals? We're looking at a high protein diet from plant and animal sources, and those plant proteins would ideally come from beans and lentils. High fiber diet, low in processed foods, or if you can, completely eliminate processed foods. Abundant fresh fruits and veg, low in sugar and refined carbs. And then we want to add on hormone balance, lifestyle support, and key nutrients, which we're going to look at again in a bit more detail next week. We're going to really take a deep dive into hormone balance and how your hormones could be impacting your weight loss approach.